Welcome to the Northampton Police Scene Review Full Commission meeting. Today is Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021, and this is a Zoom recording remote meeting. The meeting started a little bit late, but we'll try to end at 8. And first item on the agenda is the roll call. So Noah.
Awesome. Dan.
Present.
Nick. Present. Yeah, hear you, see you, hear that. David.
Here. Nick is here.
Thank you. Alex, all right, is gonna be late. Javier.
Here.
Mandy.
Hello.
Michael.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Cynthia.
Present here.
Carol. Who I see but is muted, and
Here.
great. Chris.
Present.
Then Elizabeth and Booker and Alex are not yet here. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Noah. First agenda item is approval of the meeting minutes, which I think was sent to us this afternoon. So if anybody wants to make a motion to approve, or if you haven't had a chance to read them, we can move this agenda item for next time. But do I hear a motion to approve?
I would ask to table it.
I'm sorry, Javier, I just couldn't hear you, so
I
turn
would
up my-
ask to table.
Okay.
Yep, that seems fine to me.
Is that good for everyone? Sorry, I'm just adjusting a few
Yes.
things here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's table the minutes for the next meeting because they came out today, and we'll move to public comment. Public comment tonight is scheduled for 15 minutes, and just wanted to remind everyone this public comment is a 3-minute per person public comment, and once again, we do not respond back to individuals, and we're going to do it on a raised hand function. So if you can raise your hand through the Zoom screen, but if you're having difficulty doing that, nudge us in any other way you see fit. And then we'll take everyone in order. And so I am seeing one hand raised at this point. And if we're ready to go, that's Rye Buckley. So Rye?
Hello. Tonight, I'm going to read some testimonies from community members that were collected by the Wildflower Alliance. I suspect I'll run over my 3 minutes, so feel free to just step in and stop me. I know a lot of you on the commission may have already read these, so they are addressed both to the commission and to other community members who may be here and to the public record. The Wildflower Alliance, their mission statement, I'll start with that. The Wildflower Alliance supports healing and empowerment for our broader communities and people who have been impacted by psychiatric diagnosis, trauma, extreme states, homelessness, problems with substance, and other life-interrupting challenges. The first question I will read answers to is, can you imagine what other supports would be more useful in the moments when Northampton Police Department responded to you in mental, emotional, or other forms of distress? One respondent said, maybe someone to talk to instead, someone who actually knows how to listen and partner with me. Another said, actual human compassion, telling me the news first, asking me what I needed first, asking me how I feel. Another said, no intervention, pure discussion. Another said, the person being brutalized clearly needed some kind of social assistance. It is unclear if the need was medical, alcohol poisoning, shelter-related, he is homeless, or otherwise. What would have been necessary and appropriate is for someone, like a social worker, to show up and find out what the man needed and help him. Another said, 100%, but I was never read my rights, told the truth about what was going on. I asked to make a phone call and was denied. It's too late at night, they said. I then overheard them offer a man arrested for OUI being offered a call. This was at least 2 hours after. Another respondent said, "Someone sit down and talk to me about what was going on inside. There is more to the picture than meets the eye. It would have benefited it if they just digged deeper. Also, at least made sure I was safe in all respects." I will now read answers to another question, which was, if desired, can you share what other options you think would be more helpful for supporting someone in mental, emotional, or other kinds of distress? A respondent said, more places that are voluntary in nature, where they don't lock people up against their will. More spaces that value real human connection over traditional power structure and dynamics. Why are there not more places like that in existence? One of the big reasons that I've seen 911 called on people who are struggling with emotional distress in extreme states is that even if the situation is calm, what's the next step? Where can a person land that doesn't put their life and liberty in jeopardy? Another respondent said, funding for 24/7 peer-run warm lines, peer-led crisis response teams to meet people in distress rather than a cop or social worker response. Another said, treat them as equal and their mental anguish as legitimate, medical situation or in need of situational support, rescue, in parentheses, bad environment. Another said,
I'm sorry, Rai, if you can just finish that thought or.
All right, I'll read the one more, which is,
okay.
Providing a peer specialist for the person to talk to. Make sure that the person has safety where they are. If not, provide a less threatening environment instead of a psychiatric ward in a place that feels supportive and people are transparent. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Rai. Next person is Shon Donovan. Shon?
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you everyone on the commission. Yeah, I just got back home from a long day of work, so I'm a little frazzled, but I know all of you are probably holding a lot too. I do work with the Wildflower Alliance, so I wanted to follow up what Rai was sharing as testimonies with some resources too. I will say that first of all, I do want to name that I'm someone that is a suicide attempt survivor. I'm someone that also supports other people that are struggling with suicidal thoughts. So a lot of my, I guess, like call to what I do is from personal experience. So it's not necessarily coming from a traditional professional role. And I myself have been hospitalized, so I have some of these experiences in my own life. I just wanted to share that some of the testimonies that Rai was sharing about other alternatives, our organization does some trainings around how we practice those alternatives. And so I wanted to offer that. I'm not sure if it's okay to put a link in the chat in this format in this meeting, but I would love to share a link to an online training that we're offering on April 7th. I realize that's into the future, but I want to offer this to people on the commission and anybody who's joining from the public. It's called Alternatives to Suicide, an overview. And what it does is leads people through some alternatives to coercion and force and having an agenda for someone in these moments that can lead to less re-traumatizing responses to people who are suicidal. And this is open for anybody, not people just in professional roles or peer support roles. And so I just wanted to offer this to people in this meeting, just to say, you know, like, we have resources in our community, and Wildflower Alliance isn't the only one. There's a lot of great people doing, you know, harm reduction work and that are already working on crisis alternatives. I think the commission has heard from these people, but I just wanted to offer something to just to add to what Rai just read out for y'all. So yeah, and I will be clear that you can attend for free, you can donate. I'm not trying to endorse or promote, rather, our organization, just to share resources here. So just knowing that there are different ways we can approach people in distress that aren't about policing and containment and, you know, having power over, but instead partnering with people in these moments. So if that's a useful resource, I'm just going to share it there. And thanks for the time. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Shon. Thank you for sharing that. That sounds great. Let's see, are there anyone else? Ping. Getting to you.
Hello, thanks. Hi, everyone. I was going to share a couple examples that I learned a little bit more about this last week. You all might have already heard about these, but I was reviewing what Minneapolis passed back in December. It was their Safety for All budget proposal, or it was a budget amendment. And a lot of it seems very related to the commission. So I'll just read the first part of it. The first part, I think it was 3 parts, is provide the right response to calls for help. And so it says, when people in Minneapolis are in an emergency, they want the city to send the right person for the job. The Safety for All budget plan will remove a significant burden from police by redirecting non-emergency 911 calls like theft reports and parking problems to other city departments, allowing police to focus on responding to violence and other emergencies consistent with their training. It also funds a citywide pilot for mental health crisis calls, which are the 3rd most common top priority category. 80% of them are non-life threatening and only 9% of them result in a police report. This package funds a more effective response system with unarmed mental health professionals, paramedics, and other service providers whenever possible, and allows those trained professionals to determine if they need support from armed law enforcement. And so then there's a bullet point about the mental health crisis response, and that they also funded better 911 dispatch training. And then another part that's interesting under that same bullet is expanding 311 capacity to take theft and property damage reports and parking complaint calls, and create a non-police city staff unit to take theft and property damage reports and collect evidence. And let's see, the other thing I wanted to highlight, which I think just came out in the last, maybe even yesterday or the day before, is Ithaca and Mayor Savante Merrick's new proposal, which would replace the city's existing police department with a Department of Community Solutions and Public Safety. And some quotes from him, I think, are that the investigators are going to be focused on he's investing his political capital in a plan that would remove armed officers from most civilian interactions, which he said should free those who remain to fully investigate and solve serious crimes. The investigators are going to be focused on the shooting last Tuesday. They will have nothing on their plate except finding that gun, finding that shooter, and taking them off the street, he said. They won't be pulled away from that work by a motor vehicle crash on 3rd Street or a welfare check on Madison. He said, it's clear that the system is not working as is, and he'd rather try to find the solution than continue to kick the can. Once you can fully imagine an alternative response agency, Merrick told the reporter, it's hard to defend what exists currently. And this department he aspires to have up and running by summer 2023.
I'm afraid that's time.
Oh, great. Perfect. Thank you.
Anything else you wanted to, any last thought?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Yeajean. A caller on the line with the last digits of 5171.
It's Jane Doe. I've spoken to the commission before. I was on last night a subcommittee call, and I just wanted to follow up to the whole group because there's still a lot of confusion around the domestic violence subcommittee's actions or inactions. And I just want to suggest it's really kind of important. We're at 6 months now that you still haven't heard from the district attorneys, victim witness advocates. You haven't heard from Safe Plan, Safe Passage, the Victim Rights Law Center, not to mention in the draft of your report, there's not a lot of information about victims of crime. So I really encourage you to reach out and get these meetings scheduled and get more testimony from victims that have had direct experiences in this jurisdiction. It's just really concerning that the section is so scant on data and testimony. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jane. And looking for any other hands, anyone else for public or general comment, public comment, anyone else that would like to speak? Yes. Lil P.
Yeah,
Lil, can you unmute?
oh,
There you go.
yeah,
Okay.
sorry. I'm just here to say, as I did last time, I'm in support of Northampton Abolition Now's demands. I would like to point out the fact that there are alternatives to helping victims of crime besides the police, even though the police right now are one of the few options. And we should be able to look outside the possibilities of what's put in place, because the system which we have now doesn't just affect victims of crime. It is a piece within a larger system of ableism, white supremacy, all of that. And finding these helpful alternatives and humanizing victims of sexual abuse, victims of domestic violence, victims, people who are mentally ill, people who are disabled, et cetera, people of color. Finding helpful alternatives to them shows that we care about these communities in Northampton. And that's important because it humanizes them and it really helps them out. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lil. It looks like we have 1 minute left in public comment, and I'm not seeing any other individuals that would like to speak, unless I'm missing anything. So I think we will officially close public comment and move to our next agenda item, which is talking about speakers either coming to subcommittees or to the full commission. Dan, I know we have a little bit of a report on our folks from talking about substance abuse, and I think some other folks wanted to talk as well. So Dan, did you want to give that update?
Yeah,
What's changed since we talked?
Yeah, so for the HRH 413, Jess Tilley has agreed to give us a short description of what they do in the meeting, like a 5-minute presentation of just a whirlwind overview of what they're doing, but then have about 10 minutes for question and answers from us. The other, we reached out to Hampshire Hope, and we haven't, they were looking to confirm whether or not they could come and speak with us at either this meeting or the Tuesday meeting. So hopefully we'll hear back. I'll circle back with them again so that we have both of those organizations coming hopefully next Tuesday. So that's where we are on that.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I think Nick has his hand up. Nick, if you want to unmute.
The policies subcommittee wanted to hear from some of the higher utilizers of police services. We reached out to Smith College and got a short report from them about how and when they are using the Northampton Police. I reached out to Cooley Dickinson Hospital, and I'm trying to see if they will submit some kind of written description. They have said they have over 500 calls to the police each year, or at least they did last year. And I'm reaching out to them to see if we can get a little bit more detail on that. But I have also contacted 2 agencies that I know make have regular interactions with the police, with the goal of just hearing what it is that happens, what kinds of reasons they need to call the police, and what happens if they call the police, and what alternatives they have to avoid it. And the two agencies, one I'm affiliated with, is Clinical and Support Options, which runs the crisis services team in Northampton, and it's based in Florence, and they have regular contact with the police, and they are willing to come and have a brief discussion with either our subcommittee on Monday, or with the full commission on Tuesday, depending if the full commission is interested. If they aren't, I think the subcommittee will be interested. And then the other agency is the Cutchin Center on Pomeroy Terrace, which is a residential program for youth ages 6 to 18 approximately. And they have regular contact, and they have numbers, and they are going to discuss at their board meeting this week. But I'm expecting they would be willing to speak with us as well. So my question is, for the full commission, are you wanting this to be a full commission event, or should we make this an event just for the policy subcommittee?
Nick has a question out to us, but Javier, I noticed you put up your hand, so I didn't know if you were going to respond to the question or if you want to add something.
Yeah, I think would be really useful to have CSO or any other speaker coming to the full commission, just to be able to actually to get for us to be able to take advantage fully of whatever testimony they bring to the table.
Okay. Any other thoughts about some of the social service agencies or CSO coming to full commission? Sound like something, I think I see Carol's hand raised and
yeah, just here.
Real, yeah, and then Dan, then Namdi, and keeping in mind this is a 5-minute.
Yeah,
Carol.
Yeah, I just second what Javier said in terms of the full commission, because what you just described, Nick, is some really heavy users, regular users. I mean, when you said Cooley Dickinson 500 calls per year, I mean, that means qualitatively they probably have a lot to say about what the experience is. And I would also be interested in, why are they calling? Is it mental health crises, or is it other things, you know? So I assume you guys are putting together some questions, and I would really like to be there as a commission member, you know, to hear these agencies. Thanks.
Dan, then Namdi, if I have that right, I'm not sure, sorry.
Yeah, I'll keep this really brief. It's just one thing to think about is what kind of time we can offer in different venues. Our commission has a report that's due very soon, and we still have to talk about what that's going to be, what's going in there, where we agree on things, where we don't agree on things, what more we need, all of those sort of things. So it also behooves us to think about, can something happen in a subcommittee that allows for more touch points, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about 15 minutes with HRH. You know, we had the NAN folks here for just a short while, but, you know, thinking about the subcommittee's meeting with the chief, where you could have an hour-long conversation or more. So I think I just want to be conscious about the room and like what we're expecting. I mean, maybe we could bring it up so it's, you know, half an hour or even an hour, but that also means that there's an hour of things that we can't do in the full commission too. So just trying to balance those things. But I also do like the idea of a full commission presentation, because I also like the idea of hearing it. But yeah, I guess it's just balancing those two things.
Thanks, Dan. Namdi?
Yeah, I would like to just reiterate a point I made a while ago, that I think one of the more efficient ways to handle this would be to have some written statements from stakeholders, from any and all stakeholders. There was some objection raised by another commissioner on this, and so I want to reiterate my support for the view that we might think about doing this as a general approach to this problem, of that we sort of identify lists of people for whom who are users of interest, and we solicit something written from them that we would then have as an amendment or something we can kind of, you know, add to the report at the end. This is not arguing against having an in-person visit, but really it's in response to Dan's clear point that we've had limited time. I'm questioning the quality. So I guess I could imagine a both and, like a short visit supplemented with a written document that would sort of outline the needs that Clyde Dickinson has, and that any number of CERP utilizers would have. I strongly think we should have a general approach to soliciting things like this. And I guess I actually would like to even request that we either put it on the agenda to discuss doing this, or even call a vote on the wisdom of doing this. I feel strongly enough about it. I think we should, at this stage, have a way of getting written feedback from people like this. So that's my 2 cents.
Nick, then Javier, then Dan, if your hand is still up.
I don't think Clyde Dickinson is ready to actually come in person. And I've asked them if they will give us more detail than just a number. And I will report any results. As far as Cutchins, it's a much smaller program. I think that I could ask for Cutchins to give I could ask for Cutchins and CSO to give a written report. The thing about CSO is they are a core mental health crisis response service that people may not know that much about. I had told them, 15 or 20 minutes. I wasn't thinking an hour or anything like that. But I just, I do think knowing many of these other police departments in the country are getting calls that the crisis program in Florence is siphoning off. These other cities don't necessarily have a psychiatric crisis service to siphon off some of these calls. So just knowing how this fits into the picture, I think, is important. But I'm very respectful of the full commission's time, and I don't have a strong feeling about where the presentation should be.
So I think maybe leaning toward, if we can get it in writing, let's get it in writing. And if we want subcommittees to invite people, let's use the subcommittee route and know that that will be posted on the agenda of the individual subcommittees and anyone can join. Javier.
Thanks. I agree with Nick that, I mean, this is complicated, right? Because of the timing, because of the timeline, and because of these in the case of CSO, Clyde Dickinson, we really want to hear of it, right? So it's complicated. In relation to having what Namdi was talking about, written testimony that added, I feel a little worried about that, and the only reason is that if we're gonna be that different to specific organizations, we should do it with every single organization that came to testify, and every single the Flower Alliance, Jeff Steele, and others. We should do it with everybody. It has to be a policy for everybody have the option to be able to submit that, and that being added to the record. I would be against just like one single organization, because and also was Namdi, was the way how you phrased it that time that I reacted poorly and badly to it. As long as this is across the board of organizations submitting, and that every organization is going to have the option to do it, I don't see any problem.
Thank you, Javier. Namdi, and then we really should be moving along and try to decide how we're going to handle this. So, Namdi.
Yeah, just saying that it sounds like Javier is withdrawing his objection. So I would have no objection and think it makes sense that any constituency that of relevance should have a chance to submit something written to us. So we have the information in front of us. I'm imagining it as an appendix. and we would segregate it from like the commission's view, but it would be supplementary information that would go with our report. And it sounds like I haven't heard any objection to it. So I really recommend that we think about really asking for that so that we can have that information as we finalize our writing, unless there's objection.
Can we, Javier, Nick, are
Sorry.
you still in this?
Sorry, Cynthia.
I just need to clarify.
I just want to say, if we're gonna do it, we need to be intentional in getting written testimony of everybody who has taken part of this, not just leave it to whoever produces something to do it. We should literally have a system that everybody would have time to be able to do it, and because if not, we're gonna need one or two, right? And that's what I don't want. If we're gonna do it, this is gonna be the same for everybody.
Nick?
I just need to, I'm comfortable going back to these organizations and letting them make a decision, but I just need to know if either the subcommittee or the full commission would like to hear directly from CSO in person, and just to get a sense.
I think, whoops, Dan, sorry, you're up there. I'll just finish my thought that I think that let's let the subcommittees decide what they want to do. And we can take that out of the full commission and again, have open agendas for anyone to attend subcommittees, and also know that the written report is an option. Dan, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be pretty much my response was, as long as they have the option to submit something written, but they also have the option to attend in person. And I think even if it's only a half an hour, I think having the option to ask questions for commissioners is going to be really good, to have that back and forth.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask my subcommittee just yes or no, whether you would like me to schedule it on Monday?
I'm good.
Okay, 2, 3. Thank you. We're done.
Yep. All righty. Let's move along to the next item, which is going back to the consensus document. Just to take us down memory lane, we had 100% consensus on 2 items, so we'll move off of those. I don't think we need to discuss them anymore, but it was the first item was the Northampton budget reduction should be reinvested toward ensuring safety for all Northampton residents, visitors, and workers. And then the second 100% consensus item we had was a community service department needs to be added to the city structure to accommodate some of the non-police functions that increase safety and support to the city. So if it's okay, we'll, again, and the wording is the wording, we can wordsmith it, but it's the general idea that we want to move money, reinvest money from NPD to safety, and also that we want this particular entity, whatever we're going to call it, to assume some of the tasks that we are suggesting are non-police, that do not need a police presence. We also had a couple of wording revisions that we didn't get to. And so I just wanted to, Dan sent this status on the consensus survey out. If you don't have it in front of you, I can, I'll just read these revisions. The original wording of one of the items was, any transition of responsibilities and or duties from one department to another should be accompanied by an equivalent transfer of funds from the department that held those responsibilities to the new one. In other words, take money out, should go to the new department. And the language that we revised it to be is funding for the community service department should include a reinvestment of funds from NPD. A little clearer. Doesn't say, is not as wordy as the other one, and just wanted to get a sense of how folks felt about that. Michael, I'm sorry, I don't think you participated in the survey last time, but hopefully you're catching up here. Any reaction to that wording? Is it acceptable? Seeing nodded heads and thumbs and good. Okay, so thank you. We'll move on. Another revision, the original wording, which we had some pushback on or some disagreement on from commission members. The original wording was individual diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-bias training cannot overcome the institutional history and systemic inequalities that exist in NPD and institution of policing. This particular item had a combined yellow and red score of 27%. So the wording was revised to say that evidence suggests that individual diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-bias training cannot overcome the institutional history and systemic inequalities that exist in police departments in the short term. These trainings may contribute to the reduction of a long-term carceral approach to policing if they are a component of a larger initiative that acknowledges systemic inequality in police departments. So there's a lot there. If anyone wants to react to that revision and wording about training. Namdi, then Carol.
Just saying, I like that wording better. I find it, more thoughtful. Of course, one of the key things is not singling out the Northampton Police Department, but really kind of making a more thoughtful and broad statement that's like much of which sounds like it's likely to be true to me, and may apply to the Northampton Police Department specifically, but we don't know that. My 2 cents.
Carol.
Yes, I like that because it just embeds the original statement was in the acknowledgement of systemic inequalities, and it does make the statement that that we're skeptical about the trainings doing the job, and as Nabi just said, it's talking about the culture of policing rather than just targeting MPD. So I think it's a the revised wording, as far as I'm concerned, is much improved.
Thank you, Carol. Chris, then Javier.
Yeah. Just to get a little nitpicky here, I do like the rewording. I'm wondering if it is at all beneficial to, instead of saying systemic inequalities that exist in police departments, that we use the words that are inherent in police departments. Do we want to make that a point?
Nodding heads, fingers, thumbs, I'm not sure. Any objection to that?
Could you just say a little bit more, Chris, about how you see the two terms different?
Existing means that it could have just happened yesterday. Inherent means that it was the foundation for the policing in general and the way that America sees policing.
Thank you. That's very clear.
Javier.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Chris. And I do understand that the change of the language, it is a specific point of agreement, is more in relationship to be able to advance our bigger agenda, which is the creation of the department. But at the same time, and this is more for the record, we should not, and I will not trick myself to thinking that the Northampton Police Department is not embedded in a white supremacist system. The closest training place for police officers in Western Mass is in Springfield, where all surrounding towns and cities, including Northampton, go to training to the same place. So I'm not gonna take that we are this white liberal exceptionalist town. No, we are not special. we're not an exception to the white supremacy system and a system of oppression. I'm fine with the new language because I understand how needs to be rephrased for the rest of the report to be digestible. But I just want to state that for everybody in the commission.
Thank you, Javier. I just want to make sure, I know David put his hand up, but Namdi and Carol, are your hands still up for another round there?
Yeah, mine is still up, but David should go first, and don't need to speak, actually. I'm happy to.
No, it's okay.
So David is first. Do you want to go first, David?
David?
Sure. You know, I guess I'm nitpicking a little too. I'm wondering if we can't say that it cannot overcome the institutional history and systemic inequalities that exist. And here's where I would change it, not only in police departments, but in American society generally, in police departments and in the broader society in the short term, or language to that. And the same thing in the last sentence that acknowledges systemic inequalities, not only in police departments, but in American society. To me, that way it sounds less like we are specifically picking on the police department. I mean, the police department has a problem with racism as we all do, as our whole culture does. So I'd like to see the language tweaked in some way to reflect that.
And just for clarification, David, so we don't lose Chris's point, the inherited are inherited as opposed to exist. You're okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about adding in society somewhere in the language here as well.
Yeah, words to that effect, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Is it my turn to chime in on this?
Oh, sorry, Namdi.
No, just double check. So one, I find myself in agreement with what I think I heard David say, that I've been sort of pushing this point. That I do think speaking about the systemic biases that are in all of us as people is probably a more, to me, is a more useful framing for this issue. And I do see that approach, the way I'm hearing it, as in contradiction to what Chris was asking for. I think Chris was asking to single out police as an inherently sort of racially corrupt system, that there is no version of policing that would not be, I thought I heard the word inherent, which means, you know, the two are the same. There's no racially unbiased police department from Chris's point of view. And to me, that it's debatable. I don't think we need to kind of get drilled down on that too much, but what I would say about it, to me, is that that it's likely that when we're finished with our work here, there will still be a police department of some form in Northampton. And my concern with Chris's approach is that it suggests that that is an irredeemable organization, that Chris can imagine no version of a police department that could ever meet the needs of our town without being sort of racially corrupt. And I guess I'm not willing to sign on to that. So I would rather phrasing that talks about, you know, the history that sort of ties to, you know, police departments have been tied to a history of white supremacy and all these things in the past. But I think I'd like to remain a hopeful future, that we could imagine a reformed, smaller police department that had a more narrow set of duties, and that would be responsive to new initiatives around sensitivity that could, you know, that would be pleasing to the broader community. So that's sort of my vision. So I don't want to buy into any notion of anything being irredeemable. Just if I can go on a further tangent on this, to me, that kind of talk, that's exactly the kind of talk that gets us to racism and biases of all kind. When we decide that any group of people are sort of so corrupted to the soul that they can't be changed, that there can be no goodness in them, that's exactly the kind of mindset that brings us to racism, to sexism, to homophobia. It's a kind of essentialism that I think, I don't want to be a party to that. I think we're trying to arrive to a more socially just perspective where we can see the good in people, we can acknowledge the harm that's been done in the past, but we want to be forward-looking we want to give people a path to be better and more socially just. And so I guess I would strongly object to inherent as part of language on that ground. That's what I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Namdi. Dan, Javier, then Josie.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is finally good. This is good that we have these talks, because this is where we're going to disagree, and this is what we need, like the productive disagreement. I think we're also talking at different levels a little bit. So like Namdi, you're talking about like the individual biases that we all hold. And I think some of this is also talking about, and this is where I lend, which is the institutional part, which is that the organization and the way that that organization operates, regardless of how good people are, if they follow the rules that are set by that organization, the way that they've developed, you're going to have negative outcomes at the end. I think you can, like, if this was only about, you know, just hiring people who are able to acknowledge or recognize or work around their biases, like then yes, you could actually have that sort of reform approach. But I think what Chris is getting at, and what some of the other folks here are thinking of, is really looking at policing as an institution, as the history of it, right? Like, we know the history of it. It's had problems with history, with race throughout its history, because it was established as, you know, slave capture or slave patrols. It was the Indian control or Indian colony control. You know, like it started out problematic here. So if we say policing is like to specify the US policing system as it stands now as a set of practices and a set of working knowledges, then yeah, I would say you can't necessarily reform that. If you said policing in a really broad sense, to mean like community safety, or in terms of helping and supporting and preventing crime in different ways, I think, yeah, you could restart the whole system if you went back. But I think the key is that the system was started with the intention to oppress. And that's how police have been used. I mean, even, you know, going back, it's been race, it's been class. You know, they've been a tool as an institution. This is not just Northampton Police Department, this is nationally. So I think the key is that, for me anyway, is that you can't fix the system when the system isn't broken. You can help individual people to improve and to gain awareness, right? Everyone's on a learning journey. We're all learning to re-examine our biases and become better. And I think when you get to that level, yes. And that's why I think it's that the individual diversity training, like, there's no amount of good people you can put into a broken system, or sorry, a bad system that then produces good results. Or if you do, it's on the rare occasion rather than what we want to be the majority of cases. I think that's the difference there. Just like the macro, micro level. I don't know if that adds. So I think I'm much more sympathetic to something that addresses these as institutional trainings that are, or institutional issues that are also outside of the Northampton Police Department, and they themselves can't fix all of society's problems. Like, that one police department is not going to save the rest of the country or even itself. That's where I was coming from.
Thank you, Dan. Javier, then Josie.
You know, I deeply respect different experiences that we have with in how the system of operation work, and how for people has worked, for others hasn't worked. I respect that most of those opinions come from that, from how much the system has worked for ones and the others, right? But we are here, we were created not because all of the sudden the housing department of a city or the health department of a city was being pointed as historically racist and historically white supremacist as a system, right? So that's a big difference, right? No acknowledging, as Dan said, that our police department is embedded deeply as the active part and social also as a social control tool in a system of oppression, it's a disservice to why we're here. This kind of commission hasn't been formed to address housing. This kind of commission hasn't been formed in the way that we were formed to something about health, right? This is because of what's happening in that national level. If somebody can point out to me in the last, 150 to 100 years, when police didn't have the mission of do social control, I would be happy to talk about that. I cannot be hopeful for the future and being wishful of the future when hundreds of years has shown different. That's it. That's pretty palpable experience. The fact that whatever change we do, obviously no change that we do right now is going to eliminate the police department. But that doesn't speak to the fact that we're not doing what we need to do. That doesn't really speak to the fact that we may not get consensus in recommendation. That speaks how strong the structure in a white supremacist system of this kind of policing is, that is going to be able to survive all what has happened in the last year and a half across the country. So I said all that to say I do agree fully with the language that Chris wants to move, and hopefully we do it, because I think that's a reflection, a real reflection of what's going on in our country.
Thank you, Javier. Josie?
I'm good. Those last two really put it together quite eloquently. So I'll stop.
Chris, you had your hand up once, but then down, so you good? Or, okay. I'm wondering if this is a great discussion, and that's why we're going through the consensus. And I'm wondering if, again, these are words that are not going to be necessarily lifted into the final report, but we have heard different viewpoints that I think we definitely want to take into consideration in the final report. And so I would suggest that let's hold this one, knowing that society was recommended, inherent was recommended, but then we had some objections about inherent, the idea of Nnamdi talking about let's not throw away the whole police department and show some of its redeeming values as well. I think that's information for us to think about as we write the final report. And Dan, I'm going to look to you. What is your thoughts about moving from this discussion? I'm not sure we're going to get a wordsmithing consensus here, but we have Booker, who's so good at that. So Booker, do you want to jump in?
I think we ought to let this particular discussion pause and sort of give us all a chance to reflect on it a little bit and come back and think about it, and then wordsmith it at the next meeting. This has been a really rich discussion. So, and I don't want to replay my own thoughts about what I'm hearing. I just talked about this. My wife and I just had the exact same discussion over dinner, and that's why I was late for this meeting. And I won't say whose side I was on, whether I was representing Nnamdi or Javier, but I really move to let's rediscuss this particular question at the next meeting, and so we can all sort of be like Quakers and reflect on this for a while.
Any other thoughts? David?
Yeah, just very briefly, and I agree with Booker, but I'd like to focus the thinking on what to me is the issue. The issue is not whether I agree with Dan and Javier, what Dan and Javier said. I do agree with you. I think most people in this group agree with the way you describe the history of policing and oppression and all that. What I don't think is necessary is to put it in a report where we're trying, I think we should be trying to get buy-in. And I think that the more we demonize the police in the report, as opposed to just saying, look, here's what they do. We don't need to have this done anymore, and we can't let them do it anymore because it hasn't worked for certain people. Without getting into the sociological, historical stuff, I think we're going to be better off. That's all.
Okay, why don't we do the pause? And thank you for, that was a great discussion. And I didn't think we'd get through this whole report, but our next section, which I'm going to stop reviewing the report and move on to the next item, is where the yellow lights were. All the questions that my aunt used to tell me, yellow when you're driving means hurry the hell up and get through it before it turns red. So however we want to define yellow as, that was where we had some problems with some of the consensus items. So, how about if we continue this discussion next week and move on to the section that says items with yellow ratings above 30%. Does that sound like a good way to go? Dan?
Yeah, I just want to preface that these aren't necessarily statements that we will make in the report either. Like, we don't have to give the history of policing in the US. But these are the statements that we're agreeing on as we're writing to keep in the back of our mind of why we're even doing this. One of the, so that's just like a guiding principle. We don't have to like wordsmith it down to the exact detail, but like to think, the distinction between systemic or individual, I think is something to think about and something that we want to have like that produces different results or different recommendations and different outcomes. So that was but we don't have to wordsmith it down to the exact detail and placement of commas and things like that.
Thank you. Dan, I also got a comment from the chat that we might want to put the links to the documents in the chat so people can see them. So yeah. I don't know if that's possible or not, as opposed to screen share.
Yeah, you do that.
But I also want to move to the discussion of the proposed new department, of which there is another document regarding that. And Dan, I'm asking you to do a lot here, but did you want to take that up?
Yep. Give me 1 second to copy the link here for our new department. Throw that there.
Thank you very much.
I'm hoping everyone had a chance to look at this document a little bit before it. We're essentially asking, what does this new department do? Really thinking about the scope and the range, and sort of where it's housed, but get to the points that we need to get to talk to be able to make a recommendation for what this department should be. We have a number of sort of questions in here, but they sort of list the function. So the first one is listing the functions of this department, and specifically the ones that are currently performed by the police department that can be transferred to a new department that are not police related. And then we also have one that's lists the functions that are not performed by the police department, but that you would like to see done. Because this is not just a police only, right? There are some things that the police department doesn't do at all that we would like this department to do. And we really want to look at like defining the function, what qualifications people need. Are there community organizations to partner with? Would you need to have police involvement for that function at any level? And what are the circumstances of it? Are there organizations in the community that already do this? And does it duplicate or cross over with any city function? And so continuing that, and then general questions about this department. So should the staff be employees of the city? Is this a 24/7 department that has presence at all hours and all times? Where does this sit in the city department or city government structure? Who does the department report to, and how is accountability built into that, and oversight as well? And then also really far out, what are the outcomes that we would want to see that would lead to a champagne moment of like, haha, success? And, thinking about this, I mean, if it's phased as an approach, really thinking about how do you show that this is doing what we're expecting it to do? Could be qualitative, could be quantitative, but there's options there. And then finally, should the department receive initial funding from the police department? Are there models of the above in other cities and towns? And if yes, where are they? And what are some of the other crossover activities that this department might perform in other city departments? And how might this initiative be perceived by other agencies, organizations in the community? So that's a whole lot of questions. I'm going to hope that we can start by talking about the functions. So if anybody wants to start with what they think that this department should do in terms of responsibilities, duties, functions, and just starting out with a list of functions that we want this department to do. So this is sort of the creative brainstorming here, just to make sure we're all on the same page. If there's no Alex, and then Carol.
Thanks. Yeah, at the Alternatives Committee last week, we started a similar process. So I can just list a few of the things, having a crisis response that addresses mental health response, substance use, homelessness, supporting the Resilience Hub or, similar day center. And supporting Housing First, so having staffing to coordinate among all the entities that are currently doing Housing First, housing related, and potentially adding to that. So see other. I'll just start with a few of those. Let other people add others. Those were the highest priority ones for us.
Thank you. Carol?
Okay, so for me, this department would definitely have a very strong coordinative function, and among other things, that would mean that it would improve the immediate connection between need and resource. Whether that's mental health crisis, whether that's substance issues, housing, or whether people present who have all of those needs. And so I think there needs to be a strong coordinative function through this department. And then for me, also broadening engagement by the larger community, not only bringing people into this department who would be hired, who are people with lived experience, to introduce peer-led responses. But also, I see more broadly that we need to engage the larger community. It's a time in history, nationally and I think locally, where there's a lot of divisions about who are we, what represents this town anyway. And I think there's, if there's community engagement in education around what has caused for example, the economic disparities that we're seeing. I think more people in the community would come on board and be supportive of whatever it is that we recommend.
Thank you, Carol. And Javier?
Thanks. Just three things. The first one is I agree with Carol in the educational portion of it. I'm a little afraid that you would need an independent department to be able to cover that. Because while we still live in a society that people thinks that if you don't have to put food in your table, you deserve it because you didn't make it. Everybody can make it if they want to make it. So while we still live in that kind of society, it's gonna be a gigantic task sort of to educate people and sort of the realities of why we live how we live, right? We talk a lot with Carol and my subcommittee in relationship to how you call it, Carol? I always forget. One single experience sort of erases the experience.
Oh, lived experience?
The non-equivalency.
The
Oh,
non-equivalence.
non-equivalency, right? Yeah.
So I think that I do agree with that part that Carol said, but I do think that that would be a project by itself. In relationship to the coordination with existing providers, I'm not certain how that would work. I'm a huge advocate for accountability, in that people that you're serving are able to raise their voices without the fear of losing the service. And there is a feedback loop that is going to improve the service, and it's going to create a dynamic that it doesn't infantilize or paternalize the people that you're helping or you're working with. And I think that feedback loop doesn't exist with existing organizations. If there is a way to find it, that would be great. And I feel that if we're gonna talk about accountability to the people as a department being accountable to people that they are serving, I think it's worth also talking how that would function in a new department with the added layer that that department would maybe eventually coordinate things to.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to look over here. So Namdi and then Nick.
I just wanted to say that I liked a lot of what I heard Carol saying about vision of this. I think a place that could create a greater sense of community or a sense of shared ownership and shared responsibility to create the kind of community that it sounds like we've been talking about, that we'd all like to see. You know, I think that sort of consciousness, not just creating some kind of agency that gets staffed with nameless, faceless people, but that somehow it would be ideal if people who lived in this community feel like they had a stake in it. So I just want to just echo, that's what I heard in Carol's statement that I liked. I also want to say something at the risk of adding more controversy into our meeting. I keep coming back to the idea that I don't see how we're going to get out of our subcommittee, out of our commission's work without some form of police department remaining in this town. And if everybody, I'm not sure whether everyone will agree to that, but at least for the short term, I imagine there'll be some kind of police department, at least for a while. And so I would like to see this group, us focus on this group having oversight. We've discussed the community oversight and what hasn't worked in the past, but I think another sort of healthy relationship would be that this community of care safety would be the place you would take complaints to. One of the things our subcommittee identified as a weakness with the current policies and procedures is that complaints go to the Northampton Police Department. It would be great if complaints went to this group, and this group was empowered to kind of deal with the complaints about whatever remaining police department we have. I think one of the things this group could do is be organized and structured in such a way that it would have some power to respond to problems with the police. So that's just one thing I want to put on the agenda. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm still writing down. I just want to make sure that I've got all of these. So later on when I go, I've got that list. Right, Nick?
I have two thoughts I want to add. Javier, I wasn't able to fully grasp what your concern or what your angle was about the coordinating function, but and I don't know if this conflicts or not with what you were saying, but I see this department as being a resource center, and that coordinating, that they need to be an expert on all the services that are available and all of the options that are available, because different people need different things. And so I see coordination as very important. So I'm kind of echoing that. The other thing I want to say is I feel like this could also be a human rights center, which kind of fits into what Namdi's saying about where complaints might go to. But I think the department needs to be empowered in some moral sense as a place where concerns can be brought about not just the police, but about things all of the policing activities in the city, and that there be some part of this function of this department that is able to review, comment, and report to the city council. It's kind of a rough description of what I'm imagining. So that's enough for now.
Cynthia, can I clarify something to Nick that he was asking me? So what I
Thank
meant
you.
about the issue of being a hub, which is something that you're sort of describing, is that for me, it's essential that if there is a creation, so if we have talked about two things, the creation of a new layer of response within the city, right? Wherever we have talked about peer-led, about corresponder, that's one thing that we have talked. And the other, it's what's going to happen and how that's going to overlap with existing services and service providers, right? A department like that one, even functioning as a hub, can have sort of an is going to have oversight over the first layer, which is whatever system we implement with that department as a response, corresponder, peer-led, whatever. The problem for me, my issue comes after, when that department is still not going to have any say or any tool to be able to create that feedback loop between those external organizations and people affected, where there is not going to be a feedback of how the service is given, on how things are working. And I think that's by itself right now an issue. So I don't know. I'm posing a problem. I'm not posing a solution because I haven't think about it, but that's what I meant.
No, go ahead, Chris. Other people have things they want to say. Go ahead.
All right. So next is Michael, and then David, and then myself, and then Chris. So Michael, you want to start?
Yeah, I just want to just tell you all that I really appreciate the discussion about talking about this department providing solutions across the entire city of equity. This is part of what I sent you, in terms of what the council had passed in as a resolution, and that, they were supportive of an amendment that I had proposed at the time about creating an office of equity here in Northampton. I think that this department ties into that. I'll just reiterate what I sent to you via email, that I think this all ties together, and it's not, to me, just about giving somebody a place to go if they have a concern about how they've been treated by a police officer. They may feel that they've not been treated properly in another department, or I don't know which one, the tax collector department. I don't know. I'm just going to name one, but there's opportunity for, a place that this city can provide equitable outcomes for everyone, basically, and no matter what city office or department it is.
All right, thank you. So add sort of a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer in there. So David, and then myself, and then Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief here. I just want to say that our racist, imperialist culture, combined with our embrace of an economic system that prizes unlimited wealth over everything else, has created a plethora of social problems. We are not going to solve them in the 3 weeks we have left of this commission. And I think we need to be really careful about biting off more than we can chew. I think we should be very focused on what's right in front of us. That's all.
All right. So wise words on focus. I will use that to hopefully ground some of what I say, as I say a whole bunch of really optimistic stuff about what we could do, but I'll try and couch it. But one of the things that I thought about was, and it's a little bit about what functions happen, but when we propose a new department, we can say we want this to do many things, but to start with piece one, but still at least leave the next iteration so that as it grows, as it iterates, as it takes on new role or new functions, that it can grow. And I don't see, July 1st that there's a brand new department. It's taking 80% of calls that would go to police. I don't even see that 3 years from now, in terms of the real changes, like the substantive changes. I think it's going to take a very long time to make sure that it's right. I don't think we're in the same place as like Ithaca. If you read their 100-page report, I still haven't made it through all the way. They're proposing basically just rebranding the police in a lot of ways, and I don't think that's what we want. So I think we should still be focused on that. I also want to note that there are, so I was thinking, along the same lines of like substance use and things like that. But I also saw, and I think this gets a little bit to that accountability, is that this department could oversee new contracts with social services and social service providers, that they would also be able to, having that advocacy or advisory council sort of role, be able to take feedback in from people that are receiving those services and then adjust accordingly. But I also don't want to put them in the same position where they are their own sort of grant-funded organization, just because that gets you into every 3 years, you don't know what you have in order to grow and to improve. So I want to push that this doesn't necessarily. So I'm also going to say they could also oversee micro grants. I think that's one thing that I really like as an approach. So it's small amounts of money, one-time use, sort of like the Arts Council does. But in this case, it would be, people submit to look at social problems or attempt a solution. And then we can say, oh, that program works. And then, the department could choose to absorb that program or that function right down the line, as long as it meets, the sort of metrics that we're thinking. For mine, I also had things like lost and found and other services that it's not incumbent on the police, but that's what it is. Been in a whole bunch of different forums where somebody loses something and the first recommendation is, oh, call the police. It's like, but you don't need that. So even like simple functions like that. And then there are two that I don't know fit into this, and this is a little bit about where the department lives, but animal control and traffic. Animal control is about 20% of the calls. In terms of noise, animal disturbances. The police have just a code that's animal. So in their logs, what they've logged for time, it's about 20% last year, just animal. So I'd be interested to know where that might live. That's not the police. Like, I don't think you need an armed officer for most of those calls. And then also thinking about where does traffic live? Thinking if, this is going to be sort of a health or safety, sort of group, can traffic control be done by unarmed response, especially for minor offenses? So things like a sticker being unregistered sticker or whatever it is. So thinking about those sort of things as well. So like, oh, somebody ran a stoplight. What do we do? So thinking, if that doesn't fit in this department, where might it fit as well? And then I'm going to stop my optimism just by saying this could be a new department. It could be several new departments. It could be, a real restructuring, but to think about iterative parts to it too. So next up is Chris. Oh, Chris's hand is, do you still want to go, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Sort of tangentially tying with you, the way I'd initially seen this, it was funny when you had delivered the document on the Department of Community Care and Safety. What immediately something clicked in my head was the language, right? This is also going to harken back to Javier's point about there being no introduction of a feedback loop to monitor itself. I think that initially the way I conceived of it was you have the Department of Public Safety. It's broad enough. You're making sure the public is safe. Community care I think could be something that introduces that feedback loop for the department to monitor itself. And under the auspices of public safety, you do have this sort of hub idea where, you know, a call comes in and it's funneled into the correct channel, let's say. And you've got these other, you know, sort of sub-departments like the traffic department. In New York City, we used to call them the brownies because they had brown uniforms. They, you know, get in front of cars and tell them to stop. You ran a red light, that kind of thing. Animal control. There could be a Department of Emergency Services, say, if, you know, I recall someone calling a public statement in one of the last two committee meetings about someone having been on vacation and their next door neighbor witnessed their pipes explode. And like, who do you call to deal with that? Well, there's, you know, emergency services. But all that could lay under the hub of public safety, and public safety just, you know, funnels the information to the appropriate response team.
Great, thank you. And then Booker.
So I agree with what Alex and Carol. I think everything that we've talked about on the Alternatives Committee, we would love to drop into this committee. And I think it's a great idea. I think the weeds I think we're going to need to talk about are, I also bounced this idea off the person I eat dinner with, because I was very excited by this document. And I think it's a great formative document for us to think about and how to approach. And the person I eat dinner with said, oh, so shouldn't you meet with the police and say what things that would the police like to move out of their bailiwick and move to this department? And should you meet with the city council, and should the city council say, here are things, and by the way, we're beginning to hear that tonight, I would like this to be a social justice formative agency. I think there are automatic things like 911 moves into this group, because that's where the triage happens of where do things go. I think my questions are, you know, when Pam Schwartz met with us about Housing First, she also said we need a better city-based person who's administratively supported to help people get to the right agencies that are currently all siloed. And I think this is also true for mental health, substance abuse, domestic violence, and a lot of the other things. So should this organization actually have embedded, paid, administratively supported people to make access to services without using police, which is the default? If people can't access a service, you get police. How to do that. Then that leads to the discussion of moving money from the police to this department. And actually what the person I eat dinner with said, this is actually going to be more expensive than the police budget. And this is going to require more funding than just transferring resources, which I actually think we need, because, you know, what we're asking the police to do is to take care of all the problems that we don't want to try to take care of. So I think I'm more than glad to say, let's move everything that the Alternatives Committee is already wanting to propose as changes and move that to such a commission. What I want to ask the rest of the committee to think about is, I imagine a committee that runs parallel to the police, works with the police, but has some kind of relationship with the mayor and the city council. I frankly don't want them doing social justice work, because I think that will take them away from doing work that they could take away from the police. It's like being the Black person who's asked to be on every minority representative committee at my institution. It takes you away from the other things you need to do. So I actually want them to be, I don't want police to go to this stop. I want other people to go there. And I want other people from the community to advise me about stuff. So those are the things I think we're going to need to get into the weeds about. I guess the other question I'm going to have is, if people who are listening to this discussion have resources of examples of this occurring in other parts of the country that we ought to be referencing, that would really be helpful, because I think it's going to be really important to give some, I'm sure there's no data on here's how well this worked. It's sort of more how to structure what's going on.
Just to clarify, Booker, can you say a little bit more about what you think would be social justice versus like the calls that you want to see? Just to, like, I'm just thinking in my mind how to differentiate some of these things that we've got listed.
I'm being really flip with saying being asked to deal with answer social justice questions that can get really ethereal and liquid and ether-like, as opposed to let's actually do something. So the Human Rights Commission was asked by the police department to help them talk about and deal with hate speech going on in the community. This is the beginning of the Trump thing. And they were getting more reports of hate speech, and it was really uncomfortable. And the police felt we can't really do anything about this because it's technically not against the law. And all we can do is stand by, but we feel like, can we do something else instead? And so that's why the Human Rights Commission did a let's talk about being civil. I think that's important, but it's not as important as how do we stop people with weapons going on mental health calls? And that to me is not a social justice question anymore. That is not a let's think about this anymore. That's not the way we should be doing that kind of work. Why are we arresting people peeing on walls who don't have a place to stay? Well, that could be a social, I don't view that as a social justice question. I view that as a housing question, and that should be there. So I think we should be paying for and hiring people to work with those structural problems that can be dealt with, that are currently not dealt with because we don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. I mean, I get that that's sort of a weird way of thinking about it, but to me, that's like, why can't we hire more Black people to work at Bay State? That's a social justice question. No, it's not. There are things you can do structurally to increase the number of people of color that you want to hire. You just do it if you decide you want to do it. So it's that's my issue about it. I think this ought to be an ongoing organization that is set up to structurally take away work from the police. By the way, at the moment, Jody Casper say, I don't want to go to these calls. I don't want, give me another structure that will do that. And I'll be glad to give it there. The police may not want to transfer the funds, but they would like to have other people answer the question. And I think that's what we should be working on. And that's what, but it's going to require the police will need to be involved with running along with this. The city council will need to be involved, and the mayor is going to need to be involved in terms of funding it and structuring it and saying we're going to give this organization the power to do things and not just be a new, I don't want it to be a social justice commission. I want it to be a delivery of services commission. Sorry, now I'm getting excited. Sorry.
I mean, that looks like it inspired some thoughts. So thank you. And that helps my thinking about some of these things too, like how to group up responsibilities. Nick and then Nambi.
I'm finding this to be a really useful discussion. It's got me thinking in circles. But Booker, this is my question. What are you saying about like having a housing director or specialist as part of this? Or are you saying keep that separate? Keep that, I hear you saying don't make human rights the focus. And you're making a really interesting point about that. But you mentioned that Pam Schwartz said we should get this housing specialist that would really bring things together. Do you see something like that fitting into this department?
I don't want to keep talking now, but the answer is quickly yes. And there ought to be a mental health specialist there. I'll just say this to be dangerous, who's not tied to ServiceNet or ACO, but someone that's their focus of being there. So there should be a housing advocate. There should be a substance abuse, mental health advocate. There should be someone who thinks about domestic violence. There should be someone who also understands what police are called to do at the moment. What to do when you're called because pipes break. Should animal control be there? Should in the future traffic control be there? It ought to be about delivering services, not about thinking about what's important to deliver. It's a weird way of separating, but it's moving from our spinning at the moment to other things. But I don't know.
All right, and then Namdi will sort of wrap us up for this section, and then we'll move briefly to the next agenda item.
Thank you. This is a bit of a non sequitur, but it's something I want to just put out there for thought, and maybe someone could even answer this for me. Because I've been wondering about the question of liability, kind of how these things get worked out. So like, so if certain responsibilities, certain dangerous things, or not just needs that the community has is shifted to another agency, what's the status of the law about like liability? So I'm thinking about things like qualified immunity when police officers commit acts of violence. I think part of the spirit of that is that they're in these emergency situations making tough decisions, and the law has sort of said we protect these people from harm. Does anybody know like what would happen if we were to take some of these community service things and hand them to somebody else? Kind of what liability would be involved? Is there any kind of way we don't have to talk about this today, but I think I want to make sure that there's no impediment to us, dreaming up something like this and discovering that actually, well, guess what I'm imagining is police officers having the view like, hey, we're not going to pass this on to some other group because ultimately we're responsible. Like we need somebody to kind of tell us that we're not responsible if something goes terribly wrong, and that somebody else is. Like, and so how does that get worked out essentially, and how do we think about that? And if anyone has the answer, that'd be great. But if not, maybe it's something we can think about before we finalize the report. Hopefully that was clear enough. I know it's was not as articulate as I can be sometimes, but hopefully that was okay.
Yeah, I'll take one quick stab at that, and then maybe let Carol go as well. So like other departments in the city also respond to crisis, and they have some form of liability protection without it necessarily being the same as the police, like the fire department. They have liability protections. EMTs do as well in different ways. And that's also like a sort of weird issue because some of them are private entities and not the city. In fact, most are. So there's differences there, but that is a good question and something that we could ask about as well. I'm not a lawyer though, so I can't guarantee it. Carol, you had something?
No, my idea would be, I think that's a really important question that Namdi posed. I recommend that we talk with the city solicitor about our vision of this new department. I think maybe the answers might be there about the accountability and the vulnerability to getting in trouble.
Yeah, I think that also just based on the interactions that I've had, I think the firmer that we can be with what we actually want to propose, the better the answer we'll get. The city solicitor is a lawyer, and you have to ask questions like a lawyer expects you to ask questions, which is fine. But it does require some precision to get a precise answer too. David?
Yeah, the answer, Namdi, is it's like everything in the law. It's not as clear cut as you might think. If it's a city employee, though, generally municipal employees are covered under Chapter 258 of the general laws and cannot be sued individually, but instead you can sue the municipality, which is of course what the city is going to be concerned about. And there's a cap of $100,000 liability for negligence. It's way too complicated to get into here, but as I think about it, and I haven't thought about it prior to this, I don't think there really would be any difference in terms of their liability for police mistakes as opposed to any other person who's a city employee that's mistakes. Where cities really get hammered is where they are, what I just talked about, Chapter 258 liability is for negligent acts, where things get really difficult for municipalities is if we lawyers find a way to show civil rights liability, that gets complicated, but needs to be based on reckless or intentional conduct. And if the city hasn't properly trained or supervised people, that can expose the city to lots of liability. So I guess I just would wrap up by saying that the city, regardless of who is responding to whatever crisis or call, is going to want to make sure that those people are adequately trained, supervised, or they would expose themselves to liability.
Great, thank you, David. We'll probably need to circle back to this, just as Namdi pointed out. I guess we'll hit Carol and then move on. Nope, okay, not Carol. Okay, so the next that we have is the draft of our, it's a very rough draft of our final report.
Dan Booker has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Booker.
What would you, I would love to ask the Alternatives Committee to sort of fill out some of the questions that you have in the this document that we're about to move away from, the Department of Community Care Safety. Do you want us to do that? Or I'm asking for homework of preparation for the next meeting with this document.
Yeah, I think yes, so Cynthia is also giving the thumbs up. So if people have an option to, or have the time, it'd be really helpful to sort of go through and actually answer out those questions. And I think at this point, the solution, if you put them into a document, if you share them with Noah, we can then sort of work to sort of synthesize them into one large sheet to sort of get this organized without breaking any open meeting laws, make sure that all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed in that. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so we have some homework if you haven't done it already. And I would encourage discussing these things in subcommittees as well, if you have the time and the space in your agendas. All right, so the next one, again, this is a really rough draft of the final report. Put a link in the chat as well. Make sure that I got, yeah, there we go. Make sure that that's sharing. Yep, should be good. So the overall report also includes, the draft for the report. The first section is just guiding language principles. So it's not what we're going to put in the report, but things like that we want to make sure that we're abiding by in terms of general principles for crafting a document that seems like people that have talked together have written together. Our theme is still increasing safety across the board. We want to avoid commonly confused terms. So instead of words like abolition or defund or reform, We're going to focus on reimagine or reinvest. We'd like to do that. Illustrate how the NPD is required to respond and participate in activities that can be handled by other trained individuals. This is not just anyone can do it, but that there's training, and that with that training we can do these roles can be filled. The NPD is a reflection of the history of policing, right? It exists. It's a part of that national institution. And, it's not that the NPD is at fault for it, and that the NPD has also been asked to do or respond to a lot of societal issues that have nothing to do with criminalization, but they can lead to people being criminalized. That's there. We want to include quotes that exemplify concerns, but that a quote from a community member is not proof of widespread problems. That's not how you make the argument. It's just how you exemplify the argument. We want to make sure that recommendations also include the context or the scope of the problems that they're fixing or addressing. Like why we want this document to have the why built into the question of what. And then a challenge, which is that public comments are lived experiences and they're anecdotal. But we have to overcome a tendency to characterize those comments as representative of a few, and it's likely there are many more comments when that would suggest that people believe the police response is adequate. The NPD metrics don't necessarily have the data that we would like readily available to sort of challenge that. So we have to accept that, wrestle with it, and again, find a way to make it both honest and representative as best as our ability across the board. So the actual report, and again, these are really simple. So starting with a title, we still need to figure it out. A short executive summary, the commission's charge, its structure, how we collected data, and then our recommendations. And so when we're talking about structure, I think this is also something that's going to come up. So we have the recommendations. What was listed is not even remotely what's going to be there. It was just like placeholders. So this is going to be the biggest chunk of our report. This is where all the meat is what we actually recommend. And then we have the options here of giving like an overview of the police state in the US and a description of the NPD, discussing them as well. One of my concerns, and so we could talk about flow for a few minutes, and we don't have to decide all these things now, but my concern is that the meat of this report is like already in the middle, and I really don't want it to be at the end. So just thinking about what flow would make sense, I don't want it to necessarily be like, here's my term paper. It has, the, the intro, the 3 supporting paragraphs and the conclusion. And I also don't want it to be, as David said before many times, it doesn't need to be a sociology report where, you don't get to the conclusion until, 50 pages in. So thinking about in what ways we could structure this so that our recommendations for policy changes, for procedures, for alternatives, that all of those are structured in a way that happens at the beginning or happens in a way that's easy to read and catches people. And then it's also not just a really awkward bullet list as well. With recognition that we have about 10 minutes left in this, do folks feel okay? What are your sort of gut feelings? Oh God, this is really wrong. Cynthia?
Yeah, just adding on to that, Dan, I wanted to also acknowledge Carol gave us some thoughts of the draft, and we incorporated some of those in there too, and we welcome that from everyone. This is just our first sketch. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm not sure we need to spend tons of time on this document, but we just want you to know we're thinking of how this would look, and we welcome any editors, writers, and help on it as well. So.
All right, Nandi and then Booker.
I just want to say, appreciate the effort that's gone into this. I don't, yet have a lot more substance. Just want to acknowledge that it's important that we get to something soon, and whatever effort. This is a very credible beginning from my point of view, and look forward to filling in the details.
Great, thank you. And Booker?
I second what Nandi just said, and I really like the guidance on words. I think that's really helpful in terms of how we're going to frame things. Do you have specific requests from specific committees of what things you would like each of us to write about, or are you leaving this open in terms of everybody can write about whichever they would like?
Well, I think at this point, sorry, I'll respond, and then Alex, I saw you have your hand up too. And so I don't want to step on any toes, so Cynthia, feel free to jump in too. But at the moment, I think we're still trying to figure out what what we're recommending as a group. So I think that's going to be part of this. I think that we sort of divided ourselves up a little bit. So I think the alternatives, that'd be a great chance to talk. So your group's already thought about a lot of these things. So to have the alternatives start drafting what the alternatives might be, what for the policies and services, what are the policies and what are the recommendations that you would want to see changed? I know the complaint process, that's just as an example, right? I think some of this is also going to be communicating pretty extensively. I think that's going to be something that we have to do. So people attending other meetings and things, because some of these are going to rely on each other. So if we have a new department that is also going to oversee the complaints process, that creates a very different scenario than the policy of police complaints as they stand now, and what recommendations or improvements could be made in that process. So I think it's really going to be sort of hammering down, and I think it might be worth having a pretty lengthy discussion, in our next meeting of what those things are, what the recommendations are that we would like to see, and how that impacts the work of other subcommittees. Does that make sense? Cynthia?
I don't want to jump in front of Alex, so, but just on that topic, yeah. And we're also, the outreach report is going to be so compelling, getting some of those testimonies to some degree, like the Brattleboro report, inserting those. So we're going to be very interested in that. But I think we were thinking of let the subcommittees write their reports, and let's all react to them and see where they fit in the final report, if that sounds right. Because there's no wrong thing to do here. I think the thing Dan and I really want to do is, unlike the preliminary report that he was under such a deadline to do, we want this to be collaborative as much as possible. That's really the goal. So as soon as you can get us subcommittee reports, that would be great.
So then we'll go Alex and then Javier. Sorry, Alex, Javier, and Alex, Carol, Javier.
Great. I just wanted to give a little bit of feedback on the organization of the report, having read a number of reports lately. I know the ones I find most useful do have an executive summary at the beginning, and then have a good amount of information, but a lot of the detail is put into appendices, so that you're not sort of put off by having to read through a lot of detail, so that we keep it as readable and compelling as possible in the main part, with footnotes and say, see appendix, etc. for for the things that where we really want the data to back up and the references. So that would be just my suggestion.
That's really great. We have in this document, we have, I think, we have several appendices, I think 4 right now proposed, but there's also one that's brainstorm more. So also keeping that in mind, I think that's really good advice. So next is Carol and then Javier.
Yeah, I agree with that in terms of all the detail of other models and so forth and people we've talked with. But I do think that, in this form that you've distributed, which says include quotes that exemplify concerns, that it shouldn't just be a section like you sometimes see in the Brattleboro report, where there's just a load of testimony about a lot of different issues. It's kind of like a narrative load. I think that each subcommittee could potentially make a record of direct quotes, really from people who visited your subcommittee meetings, people who are doing the work. I keep thinking of Shon, some quotes from Shon, not just from people who we access through our outreach project, but that these direct quotes, I think if they're sprinkled through logically through the report to make a point, to pin down a point, that's going to be more useful than just loading them into one section.
Yeah, that was our thought. In fact, the bullet point for the quotes, it says that we want to use quotes with care and caution, and that each section can include multiple direct quotes from general comments similar to those as the Brattleboro to highlight particular findings or recommendations. So yeah, I think we're all on board with that. But I do appreciate the idea of making sure that they're not overwhelming, as like blocks of eight quotes right in a row. All right, and Javier.
Yeah. First, I really appreciate how Cynthia and Dan have been doing a lot of work to trying to give us a structure, pretty much, and how to try to get to a place that we're going to actually have a report. Because we're really close to the end of the meeting, I just want to say that in relation to testimonies in the outreach subcommittee, by now, every one of you should have a link to the online form for testimonies that allows you to upload audio files, video file, or any kind of file at the end of the day, any format that the person giving the testimony feels comfortable. Also, by now, you should have the hard copy that anybody can print, anybody can fill out, anybody can help other people fill out. So starting today, one of the asks that the outreach subcommittee is doing to the wider commission is that if you have affected people that you know and they are in a position that they feel empowered to fill those forms, or having somebody to help them fill those forms, please do it. Because now is the time where we need to do that, and that's the time where we need to collect as many testimonies as we can.
Yeah, we also do have all of the public comments to pull from as well, and I think that might be where a lot of our substantive information comes from. But we are trying to reach out to all of the different communities. We've reached out with email links to this form to different groups. And so please share these widely as well. If maybe a group gets multiple emails from us, someone will see it and also distribute it out. Cynthia?
Yeah, Dan, I just want to confirm, I think we were talking about it. You were going to send it out to city councilors. I'm not sure if that happened. Yeah.
No, I'm still waiting to firm up some of the language before we send it out, and because it has information about the other about the public hearing on the 6th as well. But I will get those out relatively soon.
I think that's, to your point, Javier, that's what we want to do, is get this thing out there to as many people as we can. And so think in terms of social media and snail media and everything, but it's going to be, I think it's, even in policies last night, there was a member who said that there was in the comment, wanted to spend more time talking to us, and, we referred her to the survey that's coming out. So I think that's going to be our go-to. So thanks for doing that.
All right. So are there any other immediate thoughts on the sort of the draft outline? All right, so then I'll suggest that we move on. We have subcommittee updates to go through, but we're also hitting that 8 p.m. Limit. So I'm going to ask for subcommittee chairs, is there anything immediate that you need to communicate with the General Commission about your subcommittees, like a minute update?
I'm going to venture and say no from alternatives right now.
I would venture the same unless anybody on my committee wants to add something.
Okay. And Josie?
Nothing super urgent, just that we kind of discussed recently the like what kind of funding would go into this potential department and what the logistics of that are realistically. And it's a big headache, to say the least. There's a lot of moving parts.
All right, and then Javier, for the outreach committee, since you already gave us the link.
Yep, deploy the form. Try to get a lot of testimonies. That's the only thing that I have to say.
All right, so thank you everybody for that. Cynthia, did you have something?
No.
Okay, sorry, just saw you unmuted. All right, so it is now 8:03. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion to adjourn and a second. Noah, can you count us off?
Yes. Dan,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Josie,
Yes.
Cynthia,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Chris, who is frozen.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And Booker.
Yeah.
But I wasn't here to start the meeting, so I can end the meeting. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Noah.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.